Server podcast. It's good to have you guys here today. We always appreciate you tuning in and listening and enjoy having conversations around worship. If you're unfamiliar with us, my name is Blaise Nelson and I'm with my co-host Travis Swan. How are you doing today, Travis?
I'm doing good. Excited to talk about our concept today.
Nice. Yeah. We have a good episode for you guys today. And we know that because this is actually our second time through recording this episode through two distinct and separate and individual mistakes that we both made on last time we didn't get this recorded. So when we say we don't know everything and we're just two guys who are passionate about worship music, that's what we mean. We love talking about worship and we love what that does for the church. And we think it's an important thing to engage in and engage other people with. So at the end of this all, if you could leave us a 5-star review, that'd be great. Give us a feedback on the episode, comments, likes, all that good stuff. Let your friends know. We'd greatly appreciate it. And Travis and I are also not super interested in just building an audience here, but we're way more interested in building a community. And we're currently doing that through the platform Discord. And there will be a link to be able to jump into that on the show notes, or you can go to theworshipserver.com/Discord. So with all that, Travis, what is our topic and how did we end up here?
Yes. So as Blaise said, we both failed our technology last time we tried recording this, which is funny because we're going to talk about technology. The specific thing about technology is we're going to talk about artificial intelligence and music that's created by AI. So that's our topic today. And maybe just some things to think about with it is, we're discovering there's a lot of AI generated worship music out there now. So we want to talk about, should we use it? Should we use it in a church service? Is it good to use when songwriting? What are the ethics behind this? Is there theological things to consider? Do I even like it? Yeah, so that's where we're going today.
It's a fairly new topic. We're a couple years into this whole, the launch of mass LLMs. And I remember a couple years ago sitting down with my in-laws and showing them what ChatGPT was, and my parents are all into it. And, this is really revolutionizing society. And I think before we are fully aware of it or before we would like, this is going to be influencing the worship and music space and already is in a lot of ways. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's here. So what kind of kicked this off is some weeks ago, Spotify gives I've got an algorithm basically that's tailored to me. And in their release radar that I listen to fairly regularly, just looking for new music, I was listening to this song and something about it it was really good. Like, first of all, I was enjoying it. It's like, this is tailored just to me. It's got this sort of post-hardcore emo, guy with this vocal scream, but then he goes into this falsetto. And right around that point, I had that uncanny valley experience. That's the uncanny valley is like the distance between this is obviously human and this is a robot. But there's sort of this no man's land in between where you're like, I don't think this is quite real. Something is a little bit off. So I looked up the band and sure enough, this is an AI generated song. Internet clearly said it. So I sent it to Blaise that day and I was like, hey, Blaise, what do you think of this song? What was your reaction to that?
Yeah, it's disturbing how good it is. I think one of the things I realized was, had I just been listening to it or had you not flagged it as AI, I'm not sure I would have caught it.
Right.
That scream, that particular scream you were talking about, it does definitely sound like the vocals go from a male to a female, which would be normal. I mean, there's probably humans that can do that, but under normal circumstances for 99.9% of the population, most people can't make that noise.
Right.
So
yes,
that maybe would have been a giveaway, but had I listened to it, not knowing the context, there's a really good chance I would have just added it to a playlist and moved on in life and not been none the wiser.
Yes.
If that's how the saying goes.
So then I started looking for it. I started looking for them and I realized that the algorithm is feeding me AI generated songs. Over the last couple of weeks, it's like a Discover Weekly playlist. Maybe the last week, it was like a third of the songs were AI generated, which is crazy. I don't even know what to do about that. But another thing that I found that I sent you was that YouTube channel that was Psalms in the blues, like blues style. And it was actually pretty decent when you first listen to it. And then after a while, you're sort of like, what's happening here? And then you start realizing every single one of these tracks has been released in the last like month,
Yep.
and it's
Yep.
there no musician is this prolific. And then I started scrolling down like, oh, they did this to Ecclesiastes. Of course that should work with the blues, and and then on YouTube I found a whole bunch of people doing tutorials on how to make money because Christians like to listen to worship music, and you can generate worship music with AI and create your own channel and then make a whole bunch of money off of Christians listening to your worship songs. So I just figure we got to talk about this.
Yeah. Or pivot. We should just pivot and make AI worship music.
But yeah,
That's
yeah,
the other option.
I'm not sure that that'll be our conclusion, but
Yeah.
you go, you go, Blaze.
Yeah. And I think a good place to start in this topic is what exactly are we? I don't think it's fair to assume that everybody knows exactly what we're talking about when we talk about AI. I think people are familiar with big, their large language models, LLMs like ChatGPT, and have probably dabbled with them. But essentially, what's happened in the last couple of years is that these companies have scraped the entirety of the internet. That might be a
Yes.
little bit exaggerating, but I think it's fair to say the entirety of the internet, and have used that data to train these algorithms to be able to spit out new content or generated content. And that has also happened in the music world, where these things have gone through all of these music catalogs and listened to them and parsed them out and figured out what's making them click and tick and all that stuff, and then they're able to kind of recreate and reuse that. So there's, before any AI conversation, there's kind of an ethical discussion that needs to be made aware that a lot of this stuff was taken without permission. A couple weeks ago, there was, I forgot the name. I forgot it the first time and I'm forgetting it again, but somebody just paid out $1 billion or a couple bill, like tons of money, because they used pirated books to train their LLMs. And so there's this huge ethical discussion that's happening around, okay, what do we do with this now? How easy is it to create copyrighted characters with ChatGPT? How easy is it to get it to reproduce a chapter of Harry Potter? And people are able to go do that now, right? Because that's what they've been trained on. And
Yes.
when we're looking at music, what are our ethical obligations? I think both as listeners and as creators, as we're engaging with this stuff. Um, I don't know. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So that was Anthropic, was that company.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Their
yep,
Claude was the thing that, yeah, they got caught, but it's almost like they just got a slap on the wrist.
yep,
And that with music is also happening. I think there's a lot of companies and record companies and individual artists out there that are kind of freaking out hearing some things like related to what they've shared. And there's all kinds of ethical things you can talk about. But maybe a couple episodes ago, we were talking about sort of the source, like who are we platforming? And some of the things we talked about in there is like, uh, should you use a worship song that was written by somebody who failed? And I've thought about that for AI, is like, does the intent of the artist matter? And so what if the artist is a machine? And what if that artist, the machine, is really just sort of regurgitating a whole bunch of human stuff that already exists, sort of like Anthropic was doing with books in order to make a program that can write. You throw in a whole bunch of human created musical art, and the AI can then take that and sort of create a mush of
yep,
it's kind of like a medium of what is all out there. It's kind of what the AI
yep.
delivers. And you can of course tailor that to particular content and style and give it prompts and inputs to customize it. But is it really bad? If we've maybe decided that sometimes the source doesn't matter that much, but the content, like the truth is truth, it's still okay.
Yeah.
I think you have to walk one step past the is this pirating, which probably, yeah. But if it is something that is really doesn't sound like exactly like something else, like it's not a full sample of something, is it truly pirating? I don't know what the ethics are on that. But take it one step forward and say, okay, well, is this truth? Is it biblical truth? Would it pass our sort of rubric test of what we use in our service? Then is it really bad? Maybe that's a question we could ask.
Yeah.
So maybe the foundational question there is truth, regardless of what source it comes from. So it can come from an imperfect source, like someone who's morally failed, or it can come from a machine. But
Yeah.
the truth is
Yep.
still the truth.
Yeah, I think with a lot of topics that we're engaging in, there's a both and to this, right? And there's a matter of your conscience and what you're comfortable with and what your church is comfortable with. So I don't think there's necessarily a black and white answer. I do think that some of those ethical discussions around, who gets paid, who's the actual artist? Is it the artist that the model was trained off of, or is it the person that generated the music, or is it the thing that generated the music?
Mm.
All of that is still very much up in the air and very much even in the courts on how we engage with this stuff. But yeah, in terms of using it as music, I think, and I think we tend to land on this on a lot of topics. I think there can be good out of it, and there I do think there's an opportunity to like the Ecclesiastes example. I would love to get familiarize myself more with Ecclesiastes, and if there's an easy way to do that to music, that's a really cool opportunity. But in that topic, I think there's also been people that have been doing that as well. So maybe there's a better option out there to go engage with first and foremost before you circle back around and or before you just go all in on this AI thing.
Yeah. Yeah. What's interesting, like with a human, there's always some sort of intent in art. With AI, can we judge intent? Is it possible just to take the words for what they are? Like we can assess the content just by itself.
Yeah.
There we get into really crazy sort of ethics. Is if non-sentient is what's creating this, is there intent at all? Like, could there be bad motives
Yeah.
behind it? I don't even know.
Well, yeah, and again, I think that all comes down to you and your pastoral team of like, we brought up the example of Paul where he's talking about people that are preaching the gospel for motives other than pure motives for
Right.
selfish gain, right? And him saying he gave a pass to that. I think obviously the ideal is that they wouldn't be doing that. And the challenging thing about our lives is that there's ideals for all of us. There's ideals for us to uphold, but often the ideal is hard to hit. And even as I'm singing on a Sunday, the ideal would be, man, I am locked in the spirit. I'm doing well. I'm encouraged. I've had my quiet times. I'm richly overflowing with the life of Christ. And sometimes there can be even impure motives in how it's performed beyond that too. So the
Yeah.
intentions thing is really interesting because there's just all kinds of facets. There's a lot of intentions throughout the whole thing. And as a church, you need to decide, okay, what are we okay with allowing and where do we want to go? And what do we want to be allowing on stage? Is this the best that we can bring, or is this y- are we stuck with this, or is there a different direction that we can go?
Right. 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 Yeah, I don't know. There's just something about it. And this could just be the fact that I'm a musician. I have worked
Mm,
hard at my craft. I understand,
yeah.
the biological factors of my voice for singing. And when I hear the artificial voice that sounds better than a human voice almost, like you were saying, there's like this male scream that goes into this female voice in this song, and it didn't quite sound quite right. This is only going to get better.
Yeah.
But if it can do it way better than us with no effort, I don't know. There's something just the musician side of me just recoils at that. I don't know. Why do you think that is? Like why would that just not feel right?
Yeah. I think we have to start that topic at what is the point of art and what are we trying to do on
Mhm.
a Sunday morning?
Oh, let's go there.
And we had that episode where we talked about the why of worship. And I think what we're doing on Sunday is far beyond art, but art itself has purposes and value to it. And I know that's what you studied in school, so you're better positioned to talk on this than I am. And I think I'm still learning, but man, there's something about the storytelling of art and the artist behind the art. And I think as creatives, one of the coolest things that we get the opportunity to do in our church is to express the creative nature of our creator and to be reflections of that. And so there's something that's lost, I think, in AI. There's something that's lost in the creative process, and there's something that's lost in this expression of who God is.
Yeah.
And we're
Yeah.
we're again, and I think we do it similarly with our five mega churches that we like to keep pointing at, but we like to to give away that expression, and it's easy to give away that expression, and it's easy to say, man, I'm preaching through a series on Psalms and I want a Psalm on Psalm 119, and so I'm just going to punch this into AI and have this produce. But it's missing something. It's missing the art, it's missing the journey, it's missing the heart and the struggle behind it.
Yeah. Well, so maybe theologically you could take that a couple different places. The first thing that pops in my head is the fact that we are all created in the image of God as human beings. AI is kind of created in the image of humans. If you could, maybe we could go that far. But AI is not created in the image of God, doesn't bear God's image in the same way that a human being does.
Yeah.
And something that happened in creation, I think, is that God expressed himself creatively in everything that we see around us. I mean, Romans chapter 1 says his divine attributes are clearly seen in the creation around us so that all of us are without excuse. We can see it enough. We can see his divine like fingerprint on it all as we see just creation. That's outside of even like the written word of scripture. We just see the creation. And so us created in that image means that as we live that out, we create. And so if we outsource that creation, so we just sit on our rear ends doing nothing, and that creation is outsourced to an AI, I think we're doing that part of our image a disservice. And so when you see Paul talking to the church in Corinth in 1 Corinthians 12, where he says there's different kinds of gifts and the Spirit distributes them, this all comes from God. To each individual person in the church, there's a manifestation of the Spirit that's given for the common good, and all of those different gifts coming together, working together, is God then working in that community. And so I think a question when it comes to art and gifting and creation, what happens when we replace those gifts in the image of God gifts that are unique to each one of us? What happens when we replace that with AI? The other Bible passage that came to mind was Ephesians chapter 4, where the body builds itself up in love as each part, unique part, does its work. And so I think just the human contribution to community building in the church is so essential. And I think the art and the music is a really key piece of that. So I'd take it all the way back to that. We're image bearers. And when we outsource that to something that's non-human, we're maybe doing that a disservice.
Yeah. And even the art and community building, that phrase that you just said is just interesting, because I think the music that we play at church really contributes to the culture around church. And I don't want to put too much of an emphasis on this, right? I think ideally the music that's played should flow out of the culture of your church, not necessarily be defining of the culture, but the two are inevitably interlinked, right? You can go to a church service with more grungy music. You can go to a more traditional hymn service. People choose churches based on the music that's played. And so it's interesting, just this very human expression of the body of Christ coming together and singing, coming together and just being physical and being present. And then a piece of that is being sent off and given, sacrificed for the sake of. And I don't know exactly. So I'm trying to put myself in a spot where I'd be like, man, I really want to do this AI song. I think part of my struggle at this point is I get wrapped up in what do I want to be supporting and what do I want to be throwing our church's resources at. But, there's just this element too of, is there something valuable about human created stuff, human created pictures, human created music, song, art, drawings, and I think the answer is yes, for the reasons that we just talked about. Just, I think when humans create, there's something about the creator that they're expressing in that art. And when we look at that, especially as a believer, especially as a believing artist, I think one of the greatest gifts we have is the world. When they make art, all they have to point at is themselves. All they can bring is their perspective, their ideas, their manifestos, whatever, and they're bringing that to their art. But as the believing Christian artist, we get to do something far more in that we get to bring ourselves and the character and nature of God being expressed through our art. And so then to just like, oh, I'm going to push a button or I'm going to push enter and come up with a hula hoop song on If You're Happy and You Know It. I'm a little tired of it.
If you're happy and clap your hands.
I'm struggling to, the copyright strike. But if when we co-opt it, I think we're just losing something. And I could be I can be too much of a purist in this stuff of like, man, support small businesses, support mom and pop shops, handcrafted, all this stuff. And I think there's a limit to that. I also think that maybe not is that might not be the emphasis that God wants on the way I live my life on, man, I'm just going to support local businesses and all that stuff. But I do think there's something really important that gets lost in supporting the human element of what we're doing.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting thinking about what would happen if we just outsourced that creative image to AI and continually just kept doing that, which may actually happen. I think maybe we should touch on, not right now, but in a little bit, touch on what we're already doing that kind of
Mm,
sounds edited, auto tuned, things like that.
yeah.
But one of the things I was just thinking about is if there's not a human in the creative process with art, with music in particular in the church, like over time, what's going to happen with AI? Because AI is derivative, right? It's derivative of
Yep.
human expression. So that's going to build on what's already been created, but then it's going to start building on itself, which is going to be very, very stale. And I think if you don't constantly have it, humans, injecting a new human image creativity, God given, into that mix, it's going to get really, really stale. Like we're going to see, I think it's already happening a lot with our music business, but there's sort of like a self-eating feedback loop that's happening with music. And I think that AI worship music could create this sort of long-term in the big picture, like just blah. I mean, AI slop is what they're calling it already, that AI is creating AI. And
Yep.
that's something that I could see really, really being bad a couple of years from now. I think AI is going to have some pretty serious limitations when it comes to that.
Yep. All right. So recapping, sorry, I feel like I
Uh,
hit the break here and hit where we've been so far. So AI, the ethical ramifications of AI, who's getting paid, who's not getting paid, all that stuff. And then just the human element in art and what we're missing in that. I'm curious to hear, just putting yourself in the shoes of, like, I'm a worship leader. I heard this AI song and I want to do this at church. What would be the motivations for you to do that? Or is that too far removed from where you're currently at?
yeah, well, I have yet to hear one that was compelling for me to actually think that. Uh, I think I would. I mean, first of all, like I've said before, I tend to just take art on art's sake rather than necessarily relating it back to the artist.
Yeah.
Maybe some people are a little bit more artist focused than I would be. So I could see a situation where this fantastic song hits and it's like, wow, it passes all the tests, and I'm about to introduce it and then I find out it's AI. Like that's like best case scenario for
Yeah.
this
Yeah. Yep.
moment, right? I might still use it, honestly, but I
Okay.
think I might
Interesting.
explain to the church that it was AI. And now that I think about having to do that, because I think we should be transparent about that, I just
Yeah.
wouldn't introduce that speed bump. So no, I wouldn't do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so you find a particularly compelling piece. I do think that would be an important thing, and again, you landed on a side there, but it's not too hard to imagine other people landing on a different spot on that. I think I would land similarly, but if your pastoral team decides, hey, yeah, this is the song that we want to bring to our church,
Right.
uh, then I do think that disclaimer is really important of, like, hey, this is AI generated, just because I think it's important. Another thing that I was chewing on what would be motivating to me is just to um, clean up the catalog a little bit of, I got some songs that have like some weird wording, but I like what they bring, but maybe I could come up with a different version of it, um or even just like something different that hasn't been heard. I could see myself trying to engage it at that level. And again, I think that's okay to do, but I think there's something to be said about really making sure that you're understanding the implications of all that you're doing as you're engaging. But yeah, I think there's something important that's lost in that too. One of the things you had mentioned in a previous conversation we had, Travis, is AI is just an amalgamation of all of humanity. And when you punch in a song to get back, you're hitting all of humanity, but
Yep.
what you're losing is your own unique identity that who God has made you to be. And so I think there's something here where, as an alternative to AI music, as an alternative to even the 5 megachurches top 25 banging Christian playlist of all time, I think there's a huge opportunity here to focus on the human element. And if you're a songwriter, to go try and write some songs, or if you're a writer, to go try to write some things down and maybe get together with a guitar player or a piano player and sit down with somebody in your church and try to do some collaborative like music writing. And we've had
Hmm.
conversations about that, Travis, on just even doing that on a larger scale, but sitting down and like writing music together. And I think there's something really beautiful about that. Um, that is a huge opportunity in the midst of all of this storm that's happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Because really, what God is going to do through a songwriter in a church who's connected with a local context in that community is he's going to give them whatever it is that they need next. That's what that church needs to be singing. And I think a healthy expression in any church is that worship leader bringing something that then edifies the church for its upcoming season. And I don't think AI can do that. AI can just give us some
Yeah.
sort of a amalgamation of what we already have. So it's just going to take all the CCM stuff and put it in a blender and spit one more out for you. And that's
Yep.
not necessarily what God wants next for the church. And I think you touched on songwriting. And I think that maybe there's a piece in there that we should talk about a little bit with songwriting, because songwriting is a struggle.
Yeah.
It costs you something. So if in Romans 12, where we're supposed to bring our bodies as living sacrifices, and you outsource this beautiful creative image art thing to something that isn't a sacrifice, like, is that going to be worth something for the church?
Yeah.
Right. So I think the even just the human struggle of working through that in your relationship with God, and the frustration when you're hitting your head against the wall because you can't come up with the next line, and the struggling with your guitar, and all of that is just, there's such a human thing there that I think God wants to work through with us to communicate something specific for our specific local congregation where we are physically embodied with those people.
Yeah. Yep. For sure. And it makes me think back to at the end of Second Samuel when David does a census and God punishes Israel for that census because it's
Mm,
actually a direct violation of a Deuteronomy command I learned recently in the last couple of years. But there's this moment where David gets the opportunity to go make a sacrifice to stop the plague. And he goes out to this, is it a potter's field
yeah, the Potter's
or
Field.
the, okay. I'm not sure. It's something like
Maybe we're
that.
getting those mixed up. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's the potter's field. It's something else. But he goes out. There's like a millstone that he's able to use for wood.
Yeah.
Anyway, he goes out, and the owner says, "Hey, don't worry. I'll give you the field. I'll give you. You can cut up the oxen and use. Here's oxen. Here's wood. Here's all this stuff. Just use it and make the sacrifice to God, and all will be good." And David utters this line that I think is so important, as I think as people in general, as Christians in general, but especially as worship leaders, where he says, I will not give to my God something that cost me nothing.
Right.
And what a beautiful heart he has. And I think about in Malachi, we just finished the Old Testament. Today was Matthew 1. We've been just
Nice.
reading through the straight through the Bible.
All the names.
Um, yep, totally. But at the end of Malachi, or in Malachi, God says, "Hey, if you try to give your governor these sacrifices that you're bringing to me, he would laugh at you. He'd be
Yeah.
deeply offended." And I think there's something to that we should really take careful consideration of. And especially as artists, especially as Christian artists, especially with a gifting that God has called you. If God has called you, gifted you with the ability to write music or to write words or to play guitar or to play a piano or play a tuba, whatever it is, if God has gifted you in a particular way, I I think there's a huge calling for us as believers to live out that calling in a way that is not giving God nothing,
Yes.
but to actually
Yes.
use that. And if you were thinking like, man, um I'm gonna play for our governor, I'm gonna write a song and play at my governor's birthday party. or the mayor's birthday party or whoever, what kind of things would you do to prepare for that event? You would practice, you'd make sure that the song is good, you'd make sure you'd run it past all your family members, friends, other musicians. You would put a lot of work before you would actually perform that song in front of a mayor or maybe that's a bad example. I don't know how people feel about their mayors.
I think you would
That would be my
still
two cents. And
you would still recognize the significance of this person's office, I
yeah.
think. And yeah, you
Mhm.
wouldn't show up like a slob, being
Yeah.
unprepared. Yeah. Yeah, the
Mm.
context in that Malachi, I mean, they were bringing the lame and crippled, the blind lambs when God has asked for the best of the best, the firstborn, the pure,
Yeah.
and they're like, "Well, I can just let this one be sacrificed because it doesn't cost me anything." Yeah, and he says this is an abomination. So you have to think about so it's not like we have to sacrifice. I mean, we're in this new covenant, we're under grace. Romans 12:1 does say offer our bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to the Lord. So
Yep.
there is something in there, and I think if we think about, like, we're outsourcing all of this songwriting struggle and the creation struggle, maybe are we even just optimizing away the very things that make us human, the very things that make us this image of God created to create for the sake of his people. And I think there's a huge value in us struggling through and growing and working through being creative, but it's imperfect because we're imperfect. And, I think there's something there that stands to get lost, like even
Yeah.
maybe a sanctification of the song itself, and as you're even communing with God in the moment, and you're in prayer and you're struggling and you're in the word, AI could just really shortcut all of that. And I wonder if we just
Yeah.
be
Yep.
completely abandoning the things that God has given us that are gifts for the sake of
Yeah.
that creation. And I think we should ask those questions. I think there's a value of struggle. And I think there's a value of taking time and actually sitting down and working through something. I think we're called to be creative that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And just even being taught by the process, as you write music, as you're sitting with somebody else and saying, "Hey, what do you think about this line? What do you think about the thought behind what I'm doing here?"
Yep.
I think there can be I like that, the sanctification of the song itself, but I think that can also serve to sanctify you as you're chewing on things with somebody else or by yourself or in your journal in the word or whatever. There's a process that you're going through where it's, you're sitting down and actually engaging with, what do I want to say here?
Yeah.
Or what is the Lord saying here? And there could even be things that get rewritten in your own heart as you're going through this song process. And I think just even as a family, as a church family, I think we lose that idea a lot. I think it's said a lot, but we lose that idea of being in a church family and community and tribe and village and all those things that we use. There's something about bringing a song to your village
Mm,
and having people respond to it and
yeah.
having them be encouraged by it or to give you feedback. And I think that's a very vulnerable spot to be as an artist, but it's a necessary spot to be as an artist. Art is a vulnerable thing. And when we're unwilling to do that, and when we want to just sign it off and use a robot to go and create something, we're losing that opportunity to be vulnerable with our community,
Yes. Yeah.
which I think is just a valuable thing.
Yeah. That brings to mind Christopher Small's musicking concept, where
Mhm.
music isn't a noun, it's actually an activity, it's a verb, it's something that people do. So music is something people do together in community.
Yeah. Yep.
Generative AI is just going to create products. It's not going to create that
Yeah.
sort of interaction. And so the musicking experience that has to have dynamic relationships between people, you can just bypass that altogether with AI created music. And I really loved, even though it was a secular concept, I really loved that image of what we're doing in the church service with all of the people present. There's an embodied thing that we're doing together, and music becomes a doing rather than just a
Yeah.
thing.
Yep. And we have that opportunity to do that week in and week out. And that's one of the most important parts of worship. And so then to lose that, I think is to lose something really critical about why we're doing it. And I think that that idea of, am I using this song as a product, or am I using the song, like, why are we using songs? You know, is
Yeah.
it yeah, that's an interesting, are we using products? Are we, like, going to the shelf? And I think I have that mentality too. I'm, like, speaking to myself, I can go to my music shelf. I'm like, "Okay, I like this one today. We need more of that," like grocery shopping, and just throwing it in the cart, and that's kinda how I'm confessing. How I see my worship services. It's like, "Okay, I'm just gonna throw this into a cart and go check out, and we'll be good to go." But th I think there's something beyond that. There's a higher calling to that activity. There's a higher calling to seeing our worship services. There's a higher calling to, we're not just trying to fill space. We're not just trying to play 20 minutes of music so that people can get their coffee and get comfortable and get sat. We're trying to create an environment where people can connect with the living creator, the living being God.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, yeah, I learn a lot in these episodes, and I totally see music as just those songs as products, and I think that's the wrong way to do it.
Can I say something controversial?
Please.
I hate autotune.
Okay.
I can't stand
Why?
backing tracks. So years and years and years ago, I had this album. Silverchair released their Diorama album. I can't remember, like early 2000s. One of my favorite bands, band from Australia. Check them out. Um, but in the liner notes on the CD, because I bought an actual CD, because this is all before all this music was
Yeah.
streaming. There's this fine print that said this album was created without the use of autotune or any sort of computer generated correction. And
Yeah.
I just, for some reason, that resonated with me so deeply. And I've always felt that. And especially in the last probably 15 years, as we've become really, really used to heavy vocal processing that makes voices just absolutely perfect.
Yeah.
The average pop singer now, when you listen to it, it might as well be a synthesizer. It's just so dead on. And it almost sounds like you're going from one note to another note, right? With a stair step between them. And it
Yeah.
drives me up the wall. I can't stand the sound of it. I don't want off pitch singing. I want a really good singer, but I want the imperfections in each one of the notes because it sounds human. And so I would maybe make the case that we have been already artificially creating music in with computers for years, to the point where AI doesn't really seem like it's all that huge of a step, because we're already
Interesting.
accepting like perfection.
Yeah.
And then the same thing, I've felt this about live performance and backing tracks forever. I mean, even all the way back to when I was a kid, and the little old lady would get up during the offertory and they'd put a cassette tape in with the backing track. And I was like, why can't we have somebody on a piano behind her or something? It just is. I didn't like it then. I don't like it now. So multi tracks take off, and then suddenly your drummer can start an Ableton loop or whatever else, and hate it. I hate it. I hate being in the audience and looking on the stage and seeing one guitar and hearing five guitar parts. I'll just go
Yeah.
on record to say that it doesn't feel natural to me. It sounds terrible. But we've been doing this in our music creation, both with recorded music and live music now for decades. And I think if we've already had this desire for everything to sound like it's made by computers, even for years now we might as well just have computers sound like computers, right? And I'm not against technology. I mean, I've used autotune in the past, but there's ways to use it where it doesn't sound artificial. It just makes it sound just right and better. But there's something about all of those things that have always bothered me. And I think maybe what it's occurring to me as we have this conversation is it's that creative image of God, the togetherness, the musicking, the we're doing this as a team, each member bringing their gift, something in real time for everybody to see in all of its humanity and imperfections as an offering to build up the church in love, instead of using something that's pre-recorded and canned or so hyper processed that it's absolutely inhuman. So we're already well down this road of, you know, normalizing computer driven music.
Yeah.
I don't even think it's all that shocking now that I think about it, this next step of AI created music, because we're already using Sound Replacer, Beat Detective, Auto Tune, and we have been for years.
Yeah. I guess it's easy to I agree with you. Let me start off there. I'm going to play devil's advocate.
Okay, go for it.
Because I think it's easy to hear that, and if you're in a church that has been doing that or does that, um, to think, oh, you need to get with the times, or so is it the technology? Is it what's lost? Is it, you know what I mean? Like, why is that a big deal? Why is it a big deal that we sound like we're playing computers? Is a DJ a musician, Travis?
Well, I mean, how appealing is it to you? Maybe this is appealing to you, but you go see a DJ in concert and it's like, "Hey, come see me play my laptop live.
Yeah.
I programmed some nice lights for you too." Like, I get it. There's a lot more to it than that, but it wouldn't do much for me. But I'm a
Yeah.
musician's musician. I appreciate real strings and real struggle and, all of that. And I'm not anti-technology. I don't know. I don't know. It's interesting. I actually like, I enjoy hip hop. The DJ sampling. Starting in the '90s, I started really enjoying that when people are grabbing pieces of music and stitching them together to create something new. I think it's really really awesome. So
Yeah.
maybe we already have a little bit of a precedent for sampling stuff, and AI is just going to be the next evolution of that, sampling all the existing human stuff. But I think just like with a DJ, it's not all that compelling to me. I don't know that I'd go to a concert for it. If you can hit play on a track and there's nothing in real time that you have the ability to screw up or put some human emotion into or change,
Mm,
or just doesn't feel like a moment to me.
yeah. Yeah. And I think, just to help couch this, I think what's really easy is to shoot for perfection. I think we've gotten something confused as we've been, because I grew up listening to all the Pablo stuff, listening to you guys, and there was this huge push on excellence, especially kind of early 2000s is when I
Mm,
first was engaged with it. And I think the church has gotten really engaged with that. And I hear that a lot, of pushing for excellence, but I think it needs to stop at just below perfection, because when we are playing perfectly, when I'm playing perfectly, it feels great. And I know that I'm not playing perfectly. I'm playing like 99.99999% perfectly. You know what I
yeah.
mean?
Yep.
Because I know that my timing's not perfect. I know all this stuff. And I think there's something that's lost when we seek perfection instead of seeking to bring who God has made us to be. And if you're in a small church and you have a piano player and you want to do something else, that's great. And I think what's, again, with a lot of this stuff, I think there can be different expressions. I think the expression can look exactly the same but with different hearts behind it.
Yeah.
And so
Yep.
I think there's a world where a church can use backing tracks in an appropriate way, but man, I do think we've lost something. I think we've pursued this idea of perfection, and it's got to be just bang on. I was talking to my neighbor last night, and he is into poetry. He does poetry, and he went to this event where it was an open mic night, and so there's people, singing, playing guitar, poetry, rapping, and there was a beatboxer there, and the beatboxer was good. I don't know who this is, so I'm not trying to like diss anybody. I don't know his name or anything.
Yeah.
He was good, but one of the things that I was really discouraged by was that I felt like I was unable to accept it for just being really good, because it's not the best I've ever heard.
Mm, yeah. Yep.
There's this element that I think plays out where, and I've said this before, but if somebody wants to go listen to perfect music, they can go do that. They can go listen to the records. They can go to a bigger church. They can go do that elsewhere. What they can't find is me and my crew trying to faithfully serve Jesus
Yep.
anywhere else, because we're only playing at our church on Sunday morning, you know? And if they want to go find something perfect, they can go to Instagram. And we do that all the time. And we're just conditioned, man, I want to go find the best beatboxer. I want to go find the best. I literally was just watching a pencil drummer soloist, and it's unbelievable what he does. If there's somebody in my church that is doing pencil drum solos and it sounds semi decent, I need to be just as excited for that for them too, because it's like, that's amazing what you're doing. inhuman. But we're just because of the internet culture, we're just so like consume, consume, consume that I think we've lost the ability to just appreciate, man, this person's up there and they're just bearing their soul. And when people are doing that at superstar levels, we can recognize it, but we lose that a little bit. We've lost the ability to do that, I think, as listeners. I think there's even, in this, I think there's the role of the creator, and then there's also the role of the audience participant. And as somebody, my encouragement in this area would be train yourself to prefer a crappy phone recording of somebody doing something real than AI.
Yeah.
Train
Yeah.
yourself to want that, because
Yeah.
it's not perfect. It's not going to sound as good as AI, but I think there's something there that we're totally losing. I don't know if it's because of the internet. I don't know exactly what's happening, but we're losing something. Man,
Yeah.
yeah, that's not.
We're
Go ahead.
ingesting on a regular basis. We're ingesting the best of the best. We have the best of the best speakers. We have the best content, the best production, and it's being delivered on our phones all the time, high definition sound. And that's what we're tuned for. That's what we're tuned for. And so when we jump into a real world situation in the church, or maybe it's just in our living room, it's pretty easy to just dismiss it as, well, that's not very good. But I think
Yeah,
50 years ago, that wasn't a thing. Your local musician was awesome because you didn't have all of that other stuff being piped into you. And so what we're living in the middle of is a society of performance. I mean, even just normal interaction on social media, you're still putting your very best foot forward all the time. I mean, nobody posts the worst
yeah,
photo. You always page through and post the best one. Why? Because it's going to be judged. And
yeah.
that's what we're all doing. We've all become judges and snobs.
Mm,
But the real problem, I think, in that is none of the current music that we're ingesting, even when you see a live performance, it's still edited. It's still hyper curated to be the best of the best. And you're not really seeing something that's real and human anymore.
yeah,
And so maybe even the question here isn't whether or not we can use AI in worship music. Maybe it's what have we lost that's more important even than that in what's been going on with art and humans and communication and how we put ourselves out there. We've all turned into influencers and critics, and
yeah,
we've lost something that's human,
yeah,
right? So theologically, where I would take that is the question of why wasn't it sufficient for God to just give us the written word, the Old Testament, the prophets? Why did Jesus have to come in person? So Hebrews 1 starts off with formerly in the previous days, God spoke through prophets, but now he has spoken through his son.
yeah,
And that is a superior communication. And so I think there's something about face to face, human to human contact where you can literally smell the other person, the embodied nature that we're created to be in the presence of a relational God embodied face to face, where Jesus had to come and express that part of who God was to us by being
yeah,
face to face with us. So we could understand something about God that I think is in his ontological nature, his very foundation, where he's relational.
yeah,
you know and one of the things that I think we're doing with so much editing and so much technology and even risking with artificial intelligence is losing that embodied part of who we are. So you can take this out even out beyond music, and you can take it to our current world where you can have an AI companion for relationship. The world is offering you this life where you don't ever have to interact with another human being in person. And so it's no wonder everybody's having an identity crisis. You don't know who you are because you've never been in that face-to-face embodied relationship where you've had to go through the difficulty of listening to that person's imperfections or even smelling it, right? And I just think that there's something built into how God wants us to interact as people that reflects who he is as he interacts with himself. And when we walk away from that and we try to curate it and perfect it and make it non-human, we're going to be missing a core piece of who God has made us to be and how we interact. That was core enough that God had to send his son into the world to experience life as a human so we could relate and he could relate to us.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the crux of it is I think we just need to embrace being human. And there's all these theories on it. And I think about this idea of paraplaxis or the Freudian slip. Malcolm Gladwell on his revisionist history podcast talked about that and how Elvis just there was a song that after Elvis and Priscilla broke up, Elvis just couldn't sing anymore. And there's recording after recording after recording of it's like Elvis laughing and Elvis losing it and Elvis talking gibberish and Elvis clucking like a chicken. And there was something in his brain that just like prevented him from singing the song. And it was because when he sang it, it was too raw for him. And the
Mm,
part that he would screw up time and time again was the part where the male singer was being vulnerable about how much he was hurt. And
mm.
man, we try so much to cover up our humanity. And as we've been over the last couple of weeks, there's a song called Something Human by Gable Price and Friends.
Yeah.
But basically we're all just human, just flesh and blood. The song is about just embracing each other in that. And I think I've said it a couple times, but I think there's just a real responsibility on the artist to be human, to be vulnerable, and to keep putting yourself out there, keep writing music, keep doing you, keep like letting the world see who Christ is through your life.
Yeah.
That's what they want. They don't want more AI. They can go get as much AI. They can generate it themselves now. Let them see you. Let
Yeah.
them see what you have to do. Let them see what God has done in your life. And then as listeners, be wowed at the 8-year-old on America's Got Talent. Be wowed at the 8-year-old in your church who can sing. Like
Yes.
let's
Yeah.
embrace each other, and we're not going to be producing the best stuff, and that's not what we're called to do. Worship isn't a product. Worship isn't something that is a perfected 100% good to go every week in and out. We're not robots. That's what makes the Olympics so amazing, is that you can have somebody at the top of their game and they can go and be sick or be sad and like royally screw up and throw away 4 years of training when they've done it hundreds of times before, because we're human. We like
Yeah.
just being human.
Yep.
And I think just as we're looking at this and as you're trying to make these decisions for your church and your congregation, and how do we engage with this? What do we do with this new fangled idea, new AI? Man, let's embrace the humanity. Let's embrace the humanness in each other. Let's embrace as you were saying, the smells and the gross and I just think about Colossians 3 and that idea of bear with each other, make allowance for each other.
Yes.
And
Yes.
we live in a culture that our allowances for each other are zero. And my allowance for myself is high. It can be as high as I want. But my allowance for my annoying brother or sister in the church pew next to me can be at -50 and they owe me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Oh, that is so good. Blaise, that is awesome.
just, yeah, like, man, let's budget for each other.
Yeah. Well, that's what we're created to be. That was Jesus's prayer in John chapter 17. The last thing he prays before he goes to the cross, is for his disciples and those who come after him, us,
Yep.
to be one. Right. And that's not uniformity of thought.
No.
We're locked into the essentials together,
Yep.
but there's a generosity for the imperfection, the human stuff, right? That is all of us. And he wanted us to come together, not to divide. And the world right now says, if anything comes up against you that makes you uncomfortable, human interaction, whatever, like you need to distance yourself from that person because they're toxic. And I'm just so grateful that Jesus didn't do that when we didn't.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, the least I can do is extend that to another person. Right. And so I think there's a massive opportunity for us as the world becomes more synthetic and fake, and people get less connected and they're disconnected from each other. And I think they're going to crave relationship. I think they may crave musicking, actually.
Yeah.
I think it's a massive opportunity. I think that the world is being disrupted by all of this. And I think God's going to use it for his purposes as people become disconnected, because God partners with human beings, right? He uses the
Yep.
weak things of the world. He uses the unlikely people. That's the story all through scripture. You know,
Yeah.
no one is worthy of being that person who God's like, oh yeah, that one. Oh, he's like, I'm going to choose the weakling. I'm going to choose the guy who can't speak to speak. You know, that's what I'm going to
Yeah. Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
And I just think that there's a massive opportunity for the church, for God to use this, and a massive opportunity even for outreach and relational depth and that growth that can happen from it. So we've gone
Yeah.
way beyond music, but I'm excited for whatever could come from that. I think the embodied in person relationship stuff of the church, that's going to be the scarcity of the future, but it's going to be the thing everyone is craving, I think.
Yeah. Yep. For sure. And I've said it before, I'll say it again. Our silver bullet, our evangelical silver bullet is our love for each other. That's what Jesus says. They will know you're Christians by your love for each other. And if
Yes.
we make it about the music, if we make it about the church service, the lights, the perfection, the man, it's so ironic that perfection has taken hold of the church. And that's like the thing that we embody perfect services and perfect sermons and perfect. It's it's not what it is. It's not what our faith is about. It's never been about being perfect. It will never
Yeah.
be about being perfect.
Yeah.
And can we afford that to each other? And can we afford that in our music? And can we afford that to our world around us? To be authentic, to be real, to be broken, to be imperfect, to be not as good as Instagram, to be clunky in our words, to be all of that stuff. Can we just be okay with that? I
Yep.
think that's a real challenge.
So you heard it here first, you guys. Blaise says, put the less talented people on stage because
Yeah.
their imperfections are going to challenge us in a good way.
Yeah. And obviously there's a balance in that. But yeah, I mean, I'd like to think that the priests that were in charge of singing in Chronicles all day, every day, were pretty good at it, pretty skilled. There's obviously still room, and I think we're going to talk about that soon. But what does it mean to be excellent in our music, and what does that look like?
Yeah.
I think that
Excellence
that
versus
calling is still very strong.
perfectionism.
I mean, we even hit that today. Don't give to God what costs you nothing. So
Yep.
I think
Yeah.
there's still a calling there. But
Yeah.
yeah, in the
So
middle of that, be okay with the clunk.
on the flip side of that, there's a guy I used to play with back in the day. He's about my dad's age. He's a professional musician. I don't want to name drop anybody, but he's a recognizable name. So as a musician and producer, he was producing massive music events for a career. And a couple of years ago, I ran into him. He was just here in town and had moved up here. So I got together with him, had coffee, and I was like, "Hey, what church are you going to?" And he mentioned the church he was going to, and I was like, "So how's the music?" Because I knew music was like his thing, you know.
Yeah.
And he's like, "The music is actually really, really bad." And I was like, "How do you feel about that?" He goes, "It's so encouraging to my soul."
Wow.
Because he's like, "That's the place I want to be now after having lived in this world of production and
Mm,
performance and perfection. I just get to rest and just have this sigh of relief that these are just a bunch of imperfect humans around me." And he's like, "It's exactly the place I need to be in right now." Well, that's great. I'm so glad you're getting to have that right now. I just thought that was really interesting after having gone through such a long part of his career life perfecting
yeah.
music. What he
Yeah.
wanted in church was the opposite of that. He just wanted humans in faith bringing whatever God had given them in their little tiny context to serve the church. You know, and it was off pitch, it was off rhythm, and he loved it.
Yeah. I think one more just example I was thinking through is, as a dad, if my daughter comes and gives me her drawing and it scribbles and totally out of line, they're about 4 and they're not very good drawers. We
Yeah,
haven't learned how to draw on the line.
yeah,
Man, I would rather have that than something she generated from AI for a lot of
man.
reasons.
Yes,
But yeah, there's something about just enjoying your kids. And I think that's God's heart. He knows that we're not perfect. And yeah, your best, your perfect, your most perfect performance on a Sunday is never going to match up to God's. And he's not looking for that. He already is not looking for that in you. He already made it possible so that you don't have to be perfect to come to him to be righteous.
yeah,
And we're like, no, 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 but I can play the perfect song. I can play the perfect music. I can do the perfect worship set.
yeah,
It's not what it's about.
yeah.
So
So just a question before we conclude here. Is it okay
yeah,
to utilize AI as you create songs?
yeah. I think again, I think there's implications and ethical stuff to chew on and think through, and
Yeah.
what you're okay with. You are dipping into the entirety of humanity, which has not been a very great story. So that's fun.
Yeah.
Thank goodness for a good God. But
Yes.
I think there's space for it. And I think for all of this stuff, I think there's a lot of grace. And I hope as you're listening, you hear that. There's grace. And there's
Yep.
grace to use AI generated music. There's grace to use it in your music. I think um yeah, I think there's space for it. I don't know at what level. It probably depends on the person, but I think there's
Yeah.
space for it. I would encourage more community. If you're going to go to AI, go to somebody that you trust and know first. I found in all my songwriting that I do a lot better when I write with somebody versus try to make this a Blaze show or try to force this to be something that elevates me. I think there's something beautiful about just letting things go and letting it be what it is.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, that's kind of my take on it.
Okay. Yeah, I think I agree. I think as long as you're not using AI for your final content generation, I think you could use it for feedback. Hey, what does
Mm,
this verse seem to mean?
yeah, yep,
I need 50 song title ideas.
yeah, totally,
Something
yeah.
like that. Yeah. Or even like I'm stuck. I need a chord progression in G that, takes this bridge into a more moody place or
Yep.
something like that. I think you could utilize AI like that, just like you would use a co-writer or maybe a brainstorming assistance.
Yeah.
So for ideas, for feedback, but I do think you have to do that in community with other people as well. And ultimately, you're the one who should be making the final content, I think. So I think there's ways to use it practically. I don't want to be legalistic about any of it, but I do think that keeping our humanity in mind and keeping this imaging of what God has created us, where we each have a gift, it's Holy Spirit given gift that is meant to
Yep.
be manifested for the sake of the body, for the sake of the community, for the sake of building up the saints. And I for one don't want to outsource that. If I'm going to outsource anything to AI, I want it to be my taxes, so I can have more time to write songs. Because why would I want to? I want to give up the fun parts of my life. AI is
Yeah.
supposed to do the stuff that we don't want to do, right?
Yep. For sure. Yeah. Maybe make sure that your AI is good at taxes before you do that.
Yeah, yeah, true.
That's, I guess to each his own on that. Uh, cool. Well, I think that's probably a fairly good spot to land. Yeah. I think just to recap, just ethics and there's a lot of things to consider. A lot of places to still bring your humanity and just to be okay with you as a person and what you're bringing in. I don't think the Lord despises small things. He doesn't. He says it. He doesn't. And
Yep,
he's okay with two loaves and two fish, and he can make a lot happen with that.
yep,
So
yep.
I think to also be okay with that yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool. So Travis, anything you've been reading in the Word? Anything that's been encouraging to you recently?
Yeah, I've been reading John 6. It's just really interesting, theologically rich passage, a lot of stuff to sort through. But like the gist of it is all these people are following Jesus around and he's fed them, miraculously fed them. They're looking for signs and wonders. They've tried like to force him to be the king, like the Messiah. And I think he's trying to sort out who the true disciples are. And so he has these really hard teachings, and everybody's like, this is too hard. You're crazy. And they turn away.
Yeah.
And then he turns to the 12 and he says, so are you going to leave me too? And I love Peter's response. Peter says, where else would we go? You have the words of eternal life. And just processing that, what does that mean for my life? There's so many things that could distract me. There's so many philosophies. I love learning, so I'm always reading about stuff. And sometimes following Jesus is really, really challenging. Sometimes it doesn't always make sense. But every time I'm considering like giving up or doubting or giving into doubt, I may still have some of that built in me. And I think Peter had that. I think this is a really hard teaching, but I keep coming back to that same thing. I love Peter's response. He has the words of eternal life. Where else would I go? This
Yeah.
is it.
Yeah.
This is the only thing that makes sense following Jesus. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
good.
What about you? What have you been reading?
Yeah. As I said, we're just entering into Matthew, And I think that that final, those minor prophets, that's what I've been steeped in for the last month, it feels like. But man, just that hope of Jesus coming, and that
Yeah.
hope in the midst of the kingdoms of the world around us. And in Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar has the vision of the kingdoms rising and coming to power, and then the kingdom of God coming and just obliterating it all and putting it all to an end. And all of that hope pointing to Jesus, and all of that hope pointing to him, and then Jesus coming and being the fulfillment of all that. Just been chewing on
Yes.
that. Excited to get into Matthew. It's refreshing to be in the New Testament. It's funny how when you look at like the year, so we're recording on October 2nd, from January to October is all Old Testament, and just how much content is there. And I think it can get overlooked often. Just Jesus being the fulfillment of all that, and Matthew putting him up as a new Moses and God with us, and this idea of Emmanuel being in Matthew. That's like where it is the most, is at the beginning. He says he will be called Emmanuel. And then at the end, Jesus saying it to his disciples, I'm going to be with you to the end of the age, God with us. So yeah, just
Yeah.
encouraged, nothing specific in that, but just kind of I feel like coming out of the woods on minor prophet stuff, and it was all good, but a lot of pointing forward and to the reality that we live in now. So
Yeah.
just been
Yeah.
encouraging that.
Well, that's what we're supposed to do. Let's point people to Jesus.
Yep, totally.
Yeah. Yeah.
So cool. Well, on that note, thank you all so much for listening. We'd love to see you in the Discord. Again, that's going to be linked in the show description below. Next week, I think we're going to be talking about what does success look like in worship, a worship service. That topic's going to be, we got that from Zeke in the worship server. So if you want to
Yep.
go yell at him and tell him that that's a great idea or a bad idea, he's there.
No, it's a great idea. If you
No,
tell
that's
him
a
it's
good
a bad
idea.
idea, I'll fight you.
Yeah. All right. So we'll see you next time. Thank you guys so much for tuning in.